why a contract on Vader's life came from Palpatine's office. Only shortly into his rule, as second-in-command of the First Galactic Empire, Vader discovered a horrible secret. His master wanted him dead. Or at least, that's how it seemed. After visiting a dive bar to investigate reports of a Jedi on the run, Vader was attacked by a gang of bounty hunters. Vader defeated them with ease, and when pushed to reveal who their employer was, the bounty hunters revealed one thing. Their employer had kept their identity a secret, but the bounty on Vader's life originated on Coruscant, specifically from Palpatine's office. How could it be? Why would his master want to kill him? Vader was discovering more and more the dark side, sinister, lying ways of the Sith, and perhaps this was his newest lesson. To find out if the Emperor had ordered the attempt on his life, Vader joined the Emperor while taking a walk around the recently destroyed Jedi Temple on Coruscant. The Emperor was more reserved than usual. The poetic, hyperbolic side of Palpatine that so often emerged when teaching his apprentice was conspicuously silent, and Vader questioned his master. The Sith Lord wanted answers after an attempt was made on his life, and he didn't find it difficult to suss out who it was that supposedly originated the call for it. Carefully and slowly, Vader informed his master of what had just happened to him on Cabarera, voicing it in such a way as to let Palpatine come clean. He built the story up about the attempt on his life. Routinely, Palpatine avoided answering his apprentice, even when Vader mentioned that it had been deduced that the kill order had originated from the Emperor's office. Palpatine maintained a cool detachment. Instead of answering Vader directly, he inquired to see his newly rebuilt lightsaber, which was indeed a key part of the training. Both Sith stared at each other. Vader knew exactly what his master was doing, and Palpatine knew that Vader knew. But such was the power dynamic between the two men that all of that subtext had to be left unsaid. Slowly, Vader raised his saber for his master's inspection. As soon as Palpatine ignited it, he cut through the foreboding silence that had loomed large over all that was unsaid. After a brief appreciation for Vader's saber construction skills, the Emperor addressed his apprentice head-on.
"If I wanted you dead, my apprentice, I would not require such indirect methods."
Vader knew the Emperor was right. As the Emperor held Vader's own lightsaber against his neck, he noted that the fight in the bar against the bounty hunters hadn't felt like the Emperor's doing. Vader cast his mind back to a few days prior. Before he entered the bar, he stood outside with a Jedi Inquisitor known as the Ninth Sister. They were preparing to hunt for a Jedi that had been reported on the planet. The whole mission felt like a distraction from his true purpose, uncovering the secrets of the Sith and becoming more powerful than any Jedi ever, as Palpatine had promised. Even stranger were the Ninth Sister's questions, asked to Vader just before he set off into the crime-ridden, dark and dingy bar. Why was Vader sent there after all? It was a relatively routine investigation into a few reports of Force use, which he even stated usually turned out to be nothing of note. And even if these inspections did involve Jedi, the Inquisitors had been trained enough to know how to disarm and deal with them, especially in such low-risk places such as these. He began to realize he should have been more suspicious of the situation at the time. Yet, he found it hard to balance his responsibilities within the Empire, as his master entrusted him with more and more. Namely, training and watching over the Inquisitor Order was not only difficult due to managing a galaxy-wide operation, but because, of course, he was once a Jedi. The constant battle within his tormented mind between his old Jedi identity and his new Sith identity was brought to the surface every time the Jedi were mentioned. He knew that ghosts of his past were lying around all over the galaxy, and it would be just a matter of time before they haunt him again. However, he took some solace in dive bars such as these. Most patrons had never even heard of the Force, meaning these reports always came with a hint of doubt. He then recalled his return to Coruscant and the analysis of the execution order. The service droid on his shuttle made it overwhelmingly clear that the order came from the highest level of Imperial clearance, which really only pointed to one culprit, the Emperor himself. Then Vader's mind was thrust back to his current situation. The Emperor was still holding his lightsaber to his throat. Palpatine croaked again.
"I do not test, I teach,"
Palpatine admonished. Although it was strange to hear Palpatine look down on this method of attacking Vader, In later years, Palpatine would use every secret, backhanded method to challenge his apprentice. But on this day, early into his career, the Emperor assured Vader that it wasn't him. He didn't place a bounty, not yet anyway. He told Vader that this constant stream of enemies, people who wished he was dead, and vice versa, was something to take great pride in. These limitless and faceless enemies meant that he would never run out of people to eliminate. Vader thought about the situation carefully. If Palpatine hadn't ordered a bounty on his life, then who did? Vader had no shortage of enemies. He was feared across the galaxy by surviving Jedi and their sympathizers, and also knew Imperial officers who didn't quite understand Vader's role in the galaxy. When pressed to think about who hated him enough to want to kill him, and also who hated him enough to break into the Emperor's private office and send out a message, well, only one image came to mind. Just days earlier, Vader had choked a newly commissioned Imperial officer right in front of Palpatine. It was only by Palpatine's command that Vader released him. When thinking back to this situation, Vader realized that it was the officers. They were behind the attempt on his life, so he did what any Sith would do in that situation. He requested that Palpatine order an assembly of all the Imperial officers to announce Vader and his rank as second in command to the Emperor. After Palpatine was finished informing those in attendance about Vader's role, the Dark Lord stepped forward. He called out a group of officers from the crowd.
2 attempts have been made on my life. It does not matter. I will always survive. Every time, I will survive.
The air thick with anxiety, Vader spoke further.
But 5 of you, chosen at random, will not.
And with that, Vader lifted his hand, closed it into a fist, and used the Force to choke the random group of officers to death. Whether they were the actual officers behind the bounty didn't matter. Vader would stop the attempts on his life in the best way he knew how, through fear. Though it angered him, this mistrust in his master, Vader knew that Palpatine was right. The constant stream of villains, keeping him sharp and aware, would fuel his training as a Sith, and they would never end. As long as Vader possessed power, the threats on his life would increase, and eventually, they'd even come from Palpatine himself.